Good day, everyone. I'm Dunel Placer, and for this session, our group will be presenting another kind of pedagogy, the pedagogy for the opposition from the book Theory and Resistance in Education by Henry Giroux. The contents of this book are divided into two sections, namely the theory and critical discourse and the resistance, and both have three chapters and a conclusion on towards a new public sphere. Now, I am tasked to present the first chapter, which is the critical theory and educational practice. From this chapter, we will be able to explore the introduction, the history and background of Frankfurt School, rationality and critique, an instrumental reason, the Frankfurt notion of theory, analysis of culture, analysis of depth psychology, towards a critical theory of education, and a conclusion. So let us start with the understanding of the critical theory. According to Marcus, a critical theory emerged to prepare for the possible reunion of thought and action, which is the praxis. With this, critical theory has twofold meanings. First, it refers to the legacy of the theoretical work developed by certain members of what we called as the Frankfurt School. This Frankfurt School's legacy is the attempt to assess the emerging forms of capitalism and the changing forms of domination that accompany them, and also the attempt to rethink and radically reconstruct the meaning of human emancipation different from the Marxist perspective. The second definition of critical theory is that it refers to the nature of self-conscious critique and the need to develop a discourse on social transformation and emancipation. In other words, critical theory refers to both a school of thought, which is the Frankfurt School, and the process of critique, or the self-conscious critic, as believed to be a mode for enlightenment and emancipation. This critical theory is important for educational theories as a body of work. For further understanding of the critical theory, we will focus on our school. Their work focused on the legacy and claims of any theory must be confronted with a distinction between the world it examines and portrays and the world as it actually exists, and one of their to penetrate the world of objective appearances, to expose the underlying social relationships they often conceal. Penetrating the world here means clearly exposing social relationships and things with the world through critical theory. Now, let's know more the stand of the Frankfurt School in the issues of the society on their arguments and opposition. So for them, first, it rejected all forms of rationality that subordinated human consciousness and action to the imperatives of the universal laws. And these laws are based on scientific methods. So they argued the notions of scientific method. It argued also against the suppression of subjectivity, consciousness, and culture in history. So a new form of culture is criticized to be extending a new kind of domination. It articulated a notion of negativity or critique that opposed all theories that celebrated social harmony while leaving problematic the basic assumptions of the wider society. Its members argued that it was in the contradictions of society that one could begin to develop forms of social inquiry that analyze the distinction between what is and what should be. Compassion and sense of suffering for others are the basis for thoughts and actions, according to them. And they provided valuable insights for studying the relationship between a theory and a society. So to clearly see the relationship between theory and society, the Frankfurt School developed a dialectical framework to understand the mediations that connect institutions and activities of everyday life to the logic and commanding forces that shape the larger social totality. Through this framework emerged social inquiry, which explores the interconnection between the different areas in society, including the economic life, psychic development, transformation in the realm of culture and law, ethics, fashion, sports, public opinion, lifestyle, amusement, etc. So we are done with the stand and legacy of Frankfurt School on developing a critical theory. Now let us discover how Frankfurt School as a school of thought originated. Frankfurt School is associated with the Institute of Social Research in Frankfurt, Germany, which applied Marxism, the radical radical interdisciplinary social theory was founded in 1923 by Karl Grunberg as an adjunct of the Frankfurt University. It was the first Marxist-oriented research center affiliated with a major German university, and in 1930 it was institutionally established by a wealthy merchant named Felix Weil, who started the Marxist Study Group. Felix Weil used to be a political science student at Frankfurt who used all his inheritance to fund an institution that would support his leftist academic aims. So during this year also, the institute came under the directorship of Marx Horkheimer. They recruited members and talented theorists, including Adorno, Fromm, Marcus, and Benjamin. These members tried to develop a theory of society based on Marx and Hegel's philosophy and utilize insights of different disciplines. They analyze social relations within capitalist economic system, and this approach is called the critical theory. They also use this critique to larger corporations, monopolies, the role of technology, industrialization of culture, and the decline of individual within a capitalist society. In 1933, Frankfurt School was forced to move for a short time to Geneva, Switzerland, as they are threatened by the Nazis because of their Marxist orientation and the fact that most of them are Jews. Adolf Hitler came into power over Germany, making them to find refuge in other countries. A year after, it was moved to US in the New York City, where it was housed in one of Columbia University's buildings. And the immigration to New York was followed by a stay in Los Angeles in 1941. And by 1953, Frankfurt School was re-established in Frankfurt, Germany. So, the early years up to the 1930, Frankfurt School primarily concerned with the analysis of the bourgeois socioeconomic substructure. But after 1930, there is a shift of their focus, which is the cultural superstructure. Also, the following events that led the Frankfurt School to refashion and rethink their analysis on domination and emancipation are the following. We have the rise of the fascism and Nazism and the failure of orthodox Marxism and the rejection of Marxist as assumptions and the rise of consumer society that made them construct a more sufficient basis for social theory and political action. Let's now move to the rationality and critique of instrumental reason. Here, the focus of the Frankfurt School is the analysis of Enlightenment rationality, which primarily refers to the importance of human reason as a mode of enlightenment that is stated it could help rescue world from chains of superstition, ignorance, and suffering. But due to the rise and influence of an industrialized society, this reason or rationality has changed. To Marx, this reason serves as a critique and emancipation, but he only overemphasizes it to the economic or labor process and exchange rationality. It is in contrast to the Frankfurt School as it believed that rationalization should penetrate all aspects of everyday life and not just an economic situation. It also emphasized that reason has both positive and negative dimensions, the powers of critique and negativity. But according to Adorno, there is what we call a crisis of reason. Due to science and technology and industrialization, society also becomes highly rationalized. Thus, reason becomes instrument of the existing society. The crisis of reason here is the crisis of science and the society. And to better understand this crisis, a correct theory must be developed. So what is the analysis of the Frankfurt here? That there should be a need to develop a more fully self-conscious notion of reason, which embraces elements of critique, human will, and transformative action. And they should also develop a critical theory to rescue the true function of reason from the technocratic rationality or the positivist rationality. So due to the influence to reason, the Frankfurt School criticized the technocratic or positivist thoughts and rationality, that facts are absolute, laws are universal. As positivist concept of reality through scientific method and quantitative analysis, which it believed where enlightenment can exist, it changed the way society operates. Positivism becomes enemy of reason, and it serves as the new forms of social administration and domination. So here, The Frankfurt School is against the positivist fetishism or absolutizing of facts and the lack of theoretical foundation. For them, a need to develop a critical theory is a must to emancipate society from this dominating positivist. So, for this, the question now is what are the constitutive elements essential towards a critical theory? It leads now to the Frankfurt School's notion of theory. And to develop the theory, one should know first data or facts on the relationships that exist in the society. And the facts should not be grounded on the empiricist notion that only the classification and arrangement of facts are needed towards developing a theory. For Frankfurt School, it should have also the meanings and substance from connecting theory and society and understand the significance of the facts, and that is the right social theory. So here are some theory by Frankfurt School. First, is the notion that as opposition to empiricism, or it rejected the absolutizing and fetishism of facts. Second is the notion of self-criticism, that it's against positivist neutrality, that one should develop meta-theory, value-laden interest, and critical reflection. Third is the notion of immanent criticism. It means that the critical spirit of theory should be represented in its unmasking function. It believes that a great truth wants to be criticized, not idolized. Fourth is the notion of dialectical thought, that a critical theory should function as a mode of critique and a mode of theoretical reconstruction. And the fifth one is the dialectical notion of theory and society, that experience is not limited to our observation, because observation cannot be attributed to critical reflection and understanding the realm of empirical investigation. Another point is that while critical theory insists that thought and action are interrelated and their emancipatory goal, it emphasized that the need for thought and action must have alliance rather than purely unite. One can dissolve the other. For example, the traditional theory points out that the concrete experience is the great teacher, which is the manifestation of emphasis more on action or the concrete experience than a theory as a source of knowledge. So as Frankfurt School wanted to highlight critical theory than focusing on concrete experience, it criticized the value of experience that depends on how it is interpreted and defined and making it very subjective. As a general analysis of our notions of theory, Adorno, Horkheimer, and Marcuse provided that for a self-conscious human beings to act collectively against the modes of technocratic rationality, their behavior should be mediated by critical analysis. In other words, critical theory is needed. But this critical theory should have the goals of political and social emancipation and the alliance of thought and action or rationality in the interest of liberating the community and society and merging the desire for individual freedom and social freedom. Now, let's go to the Frankfurt School's analysis of the culture. So the traditional notion of culture was rejected by the Frankfurt School. They rejected that culture is an autonomous fashion unrelated to political and economic life process of society. Frankfurt School also criticized transformation to the role of culture from Enlightenment rationality to a repressive forms of positivist rationality. Schools as mass cultural institutions have also changed their role and becomes a site for production of labor to a new techno-realized society. Here, culture is criticized as a mode of the new domination or the ideological domination as its power is spread through mass media, technology, and other cultural institutions. Also, science and technology served as a dominating factor in culture, creating an industrialized culture. So that is why critical theorists coined the term culture industry, as culture becomes a new industry which is influenced by social and political domination of the capitalist. And since mass media is powerful, it made people believe that what they spread through mass media are the reality. Thus, culture standardized and rationalized that reality is really manifested in the realm of culture, and theories criticize the cultural products. Example of that is art that is already influenced by the capitalist. Art does not have any more the power to expose the real relationships in society like opposition and resistance, but rather it just serves as an aesthetic expression, pleasure, and fiction. For Marcus, the truth of art lies break the monopoly of the established reality to define what is real. In this rupture, according to him, the fictitious world of arts appears as the true reality. Another critique of the Frankfurt School is the emphasis of culture to the amusement and play as a repressive or hiding the capitalist real agenda. Thus, there is a need for collective critical consciousness and sensibility or the discourse of opposition to free society from this repression. And that critical consciousness paved the way for the Frankfurt School to analyze deaf psychology. Deaf psychology here is focusing on the unconscious of the individual as it studies the processes outside the conscious awareness. This is to help individual become aware of what not yet known or what is cast out of his consciousness. The Frankfurt School believes that the theory of consciousness and depth psychology is needed to explain the subjective dimensions of liberation and domination. Since Marx provided the understanding of the domination through political and economic dimensions, he failed to establish focus on the psychic dimensions of the individuals. Thus, Frankfurt School analyzed the formal structure of consciousness in order to discover the humanized society and how individual can also contribute to his own dehumanization. And they referred it to the critical study of Freud. So here it emphasized for Freud psychology, it emphasized here that metapsychology or the interplay between human and society, which can have an antagonistic character, and how the society reproduced its powers in and over the individual's consciousness. Also, Freud gives an idea on the dynamics of psychic domination and liberation, and his radical assumptions include first, which are the three elements in developing a depth psychology. The first one is Freud provided a psychological structure with underlying struggle between eros or life instinct, thanatos, the death instinct, and the outside world. Second, Freud studies on psychopathology, which highlights that humans have the capacity for self-destructiveness, loss of ego, and the decline of influence of family, which added to the Frankfurt's analysis of mass society and the authoritarian personality. And the third is focusing on Freud's theory of instincts and the metapsychology, which is a theoretical framework for unraveling and exposing the objective and the psychological obstacles to social change. Here, the theory of Freud on psychoanalysis and metapsychology give insights on how social change can exist in society. The Here also, as analyzed by Marcuse, social repression can also be seen in our inner history that includes our needs, satisfaction, and values. We have our needs that are part of our social routines of everyday lives. On the other hand, humans also have the capacity to desire for the false needs that is what oppressors do. Thus, considering it as their needs to develop their patterns and habits and become part of their lives. From the different critiques and analysis, the thoughts of Frankfurt School provides a major challenge and a stimulus to educational theorists who are critical thinkers based on assumptions drawn from a positivist rationality. So towards a critical theory of education, we have here emerged a different radical view of knowledge. So the first one is that knowledge that would instruct the oppressed about their situation as a group situated within a specific relations of domination and subordination. Also, a knowledge that would illuminate how the oppressed could develop a discourse free from distortions of their own partly mangled cultural inheritance, and a knowledge that would provide motivational connection and would link a radical history to the vision of the future and the desires and needs for a new society and the new forms of social relations. Also, towards a critical theory of education, the Frankfurt School's theory of culture offers new concepts and analyzing the role that schools play as the agents of social and cultural reproduction. By illuminating the relationship between power and culture, the Frankfurt School provides a perspective on the way in which dominant ideologies are constituted and mediated via specific cultural formations. So, as a conclusion, Adorning, Horkheimer, and Marcus provide theoretical insights for developing a critical theory of education that focus on positivist rationality, their view of theory, critical reconstruction of theory of culture, and the analysis of depth of psychology. Also, critical theorists did not develop a comprehensive theoretical approach for dealing with the patterns of conflict and contradictions that existed in various cultural spheres. Lastly, critical theory needed to provide the opportunity to both critique and elaborate its insights beyond constraints and historical conditions under which they were first generated. It must be stressed that the insights critical theory has provided have not been exhausted. I would like to end with that. Let me end my presentation with a short quote from Paulo Freire that educator has the duty of not being neutral. We experience change. We observe some dominating authority in education, but we have the inner power as educators to resist oppressing elements. And that small power, when collectively shared, becomes a powerful tool to influence the young minds to be instruments leading to a free and better society. With that, thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful report. Hindi ko ina-expect na ganito kaganda yung report ni Sir Donel. Although meron lang akong some comments Minimal comments to sir para at least mas maano natin. Actually, this is one of the best presentation na narinig ko. I really commend you for this very beautiful presentations and also a good schematic schema of the presentation. Ang medyo po nakulang is yung pronunciation of the names. So medyo hindi ka familiar with the names. Just like for example, misspelled yung Adorno, nakalagay Adorio.
Yes po, sir.
And
Sorry.
also another is you also need to yung pronunciation ng nung name ni Marcuse is not Marcus, it's Marcuse. So yun lang, pero napakaganda ng presentation mo. Any philosophy student,
Thank you, sir. Thank you po.
very talaga sa iyo sa pagkakaano mo na yon. Hindi ko ina-expect na ganyan kaganda yung presentation mo. But anyway, okay. I just wanted to ask, naintindihan nyo ba or are there certain difficulty na napansin kayo? Para at least before we go on with the discussions. Anyone? Anyone? Naunawaan nyo? Yes or no? Kasi ibig sabihin, pag hindi, ay go na tayo uli sa another topic. Okay, so ibig sabihin ng silence ay naunawaan pero hindi ako naniniwala na nauunawaan nyo So kasi medyo mahirap tong ano na to. Okay, so but anyway, I just wanted to explain you into this. It's because there are many theories behind this critical theory. And ano ba talaga, what is the reason behind why critical theory emerged as a theory, particularly introduced by, actually meron na yung waves eh. We have 3 waves of critical theory. We are now in the 3rd wave of critical theory. So the first wave of critical theory is by Marcuse, Adorno, Benjamin, and also Horkheimer. And then we have another, particularly by Habermas. And then ngayon ay nandito na tayo kay Axel Honneth. Hinahanap ko lang yung libro ko dito. May libro ako niyan, particularly dealing with the history of critical theory. Hindi ko lang makita kung nasaan ngayon. So, but anyway, that is a movement. Okay, that is a movement na nag-emerge out of, particularly a dismay to Marxism. Pero the idea here is that it basically use Marxism still as a framework. Pero in order to better understand critical theory, we really need to understand, particularly as in your on the screen, we need to understand the Enlightenment vision. And the Enlightenment vision, or particularly modernity, wanted to achieve happiness, particularly progress. And accordingly, we can only achieve this happiness, through the realization of freedom, wealth, material goods, and health. Okay? So yung panahon kasi nung panahon ng after Renaissance, ito na yung naging proyekto. Okay? We need to take into consideration that after the Renaissance, they are already questioning social structures. Okay? Pero not basically social structures. It started with the idea, questioning the idea, the philosophical framework that started from science. Okay? But sooner or later, after which is that, yung religious disbelief, against science led into the realization of reason. Okay, mamaya titingnan lang natin okay, tingnan natin para at least medyo mas maganda. Kasi nagba-backward discussion kasi ako, kaya medyo na malilito kayo somehow. Okay, it started with the realization of the importance of reason. Okay? Particularly expounded by Bacon, Descartes. Okay? So we need to take into consideration that before 1620, before Bacon, before Descartes, before John Locke, there is particularly the dominance of religion, particularly the dominance of Roman Catholicism. Napaka-dominante ng Roman Catholicism na ang nangyari is that it is also particularly an ideology that somehow nagbigay ng basbas for the perpetuation of feudalism. Kung dati-dati ang Roman Catholicism or ang Christianity is a minority religion, but sooner or later naging dominant religion, then all of a sudden naging oppressive religion na. And then sooner or later, anong nangyari? Ang nangyari is that sobrang dominant ng Roman Catholicism ideas, then all of a sudden, biglang pinababaksak na ang Roman Catholicism ng science. Okay? Kasi naging, for example, anong nangyari? Question na ni Galileo ang pananaw ng science na, I don't know, Marvin, sino pa ba, Jed, kung ano bang tawag sa views, ang old views ng Gladys, ano yung tawag sa old views na the earth is the center of the universe? And then question yun, di ba? Question yun ni yes, Gladys?
Geocentric theory, sir.
Okay, geocentric theory. So then all of a sudden question yun ni Galileo, pero bakit niya question yun? Because he invented the telescope and also with the use of geometry. And then sooner or later, anong ginawa kay Galileo? Ang ginawa sa kanya is house arrest. Diba? So, and then after that house arrest, anong nangyari? Okay? Sumunod si Johannes Kepler and etc. Nagbigay ng mga different theories. Pero, Okay? Sooner or later, ayaw pa rin paniwalaan ng simbahan. Okay? Parang anong nangyari? Sooner or later, Ferdinand Magellan was able to circumnavigate the earth. So yung pagka-circumnavigation ni Ferdinand Magellan, all of a sudden, napatunayan nila na ang mundo ay, okay, ang mundo ay bilog. So, and because of this realization, anong nangyari? Ang nangyari is that the authority of the church, tinwestiyon na nila yung authority ng church. Kaya for example, for Descartes, sabi ni Descartes, ano na lang ang totoo? Ano na lang yung mga bagay na ano? So that's why I need to put everything into doubt. I need to doubt the existence of God because I'm still not sure about it. Ano na yung foundation ng knowledge? Kung dati-dati yung knowledge ay dinidikta ng simbahan na simula sa Diyos papunta sa sangsinukob, pero ngayon nawala na yung paniniwala na to dahil hindi ko na sigurado. So, he doubted the existence of God. Okay, he doubted the existence of the world, and Descartes also doubted even his own very existence. So yun yung phenomenal kay Descartes. Pero kay Bacon, sinabi niya, ang problema kasi sa atin, meron tayong mga tinatawag na theaters of the mind. Ano, na nagki-create tayo ng mga fallacy. That's why we really need to have a form of scientific thinking through what we call induction. Okay? And then sooner or later, okay, kay Descartes, anong ginawa ni Descartes? Sabi niya, hanggang sa nag-came up siya with after his doubt, okay, after his methodic doubt, he doubted, okay, he come up with a certain thing na sigurado na hindi niya pwedeng i-deny, na hindi niya pwedeng pagdudahan. At ano yung hindi niya pwedeng pagdudahan? Pwede bang pa-open ng camera ng iba para at least I can know kung ako ay nawawala? So, ano yung hindi niya pwedeng pagdudahan? Ang sabi ni Descartes, meron lang pala akong hindi pwedeng pagdudahan. Na hindi ko ma-deny na ito talaga ang ano yung hindi ko pwedeng pagdudahan? Sabi niya, na ako ay nagdududa. You cannot doubt that you are doubting. Kaya, umano yung tinatawag na cogito ergo sum. Yun. I think, therefore I am. Because doubting is a form of thinking. So, ibig sabihin, from that discovery of the cogito, okay, the reason, all of a sudden, okay, nagkaroon na ng hierarchy of individualism and science. Okay? At pagkakaroon ng individualism, okay, napahalagahan din na i-apply ito politically. Kaya nga nag-emerge, okay, yung idea sa England, sa United States, and France, yung realization of freedom through democracy. 'Di ba? Tingnan mo ang nangyari sa France. Nagkaroon ng tinatawag na French Revolution in 1789. 'Di ba? Tapos all of a sudden nagkaroon ng realization of freedom. Tapos all of a sudden through Adam Smith, The Wealth of the Nation, there should be an unlimited accumulation of the wealth of the individual so that we will be able, that is the promotion of capitalism. But science, nag-develop siya through Newton, pinressyon ni Newton yung physics ni Aristotle, okay? And then after that, okay, ito ay Newton and Leibniz, ito yung tinatawag nating ang mga founders of calculus. And then kay Newton na physics, okay? And then sooner or later, this science has been applied into engineering, okay, through James Watt and also the Industrial Revolution towards the production of material goods. And then sooner or later, this production of material goods has a certain point of standardization. Diba? Kaya nga, na-standardize na yung mga for example, tingnan natin, yung mga damit natin, standard na pagbibili ka, etc. So yun. And then sooner or later, medicine. Nagkaroon ng mga, for example, inventions of vaccines, okay, and etc. through the promotion of health. And the promotion of health, dati-dati, ang daming mga, every now and then, ang daming mga epidemic. Okay, ang daming mga epidemic na nangyayari. And then sooner or later, because of this realization, okay, ano yung project, therefore, ng enlightenment is happiness and progress. But, anong nangyari? This everything has been questioned by Marx. Question to hindi lang ni Marx, question ito ng tatlong mga tinatawag nating mga masters of suspicions. Okay, Marx question, okay, capitalism. Okay? And then we have another is Nietzsche. Okay? Itong tao na to, ano? Nietzsche question, okay? Yung consequences ng modernity. Particularly, okay, the authority of religion, kasi kahit na nangyayari to, matindi pa rin ang religion, ang influence ng religion. And then we have Freud, who questioned the stability of the ego. Kanina sinabi nito, Eros, Thanatos, and also, 'di ba? So yun ang sinabi ni Dunel. So, pero Marx wanted, okay, wanted to go against capitalism, and he criticized capitalism by questioning its economic structure. So yun yung punto. Pero, okay, ang nangyari, hindi kine-question yung superstructure. Hindi kine-question yung ideology behind. Although, meron dun si Marx ng kaunti. Pero ang pinopromote kasi hindi naman, okay, ang sinasabi ng mga critical theories, they follow Marx theory, okay, pero they are against Marxism. Because Marxism, for example, promotes, okay, for example, ang mga komunista, di ba? Tingnan mo na lang ano yung mga communist country na mayroon tayo, Russia, North Korea, Cuba, ano? So they are against capitalism, okay? Pero sila rin ano ang ginagawa nila with human rights? Nirerespeto ba nila ang human rights? And that is a problem, okay? So meaning to say, okay, para sa ang critical theory, the mission of critical theory is that kinikriticize nila ang capitalism, at the same time, kinikriticize din nila ang communism and Marxism, orthodox Marxism, and they are not the left, but the left of the left. Yan yun. The new left. Okay? Nagagets nyo yung punto? Nagagets nyo na? So, kaya lang, ang problema, okay, ang problema is that they wanted to develop a certain kind of social theory because there is a danger. Okay, ano yung kine-question? Sobra kasing tindi ng positivist idea. Well, yes, marami dito for science. But the problem is, can we absolutize scientific facts? That is a question. Kaya nga sinasabi nila na yung tinatawag nating fetishism, okay, with scientific facts. Pero ang problema kasi, you cannot, okay, even though there is a scientific behind, okay, for example, the analysis, okay, for example, of a certain phenomenon, pero ang problema, in terms of human relationship, asan ang ano dyan, scientific facts? So therefore, a scientific facts is different from, okay, a certain social theory. Okay? So yun yung gusto. Kasi ang nagiging problema, masyadong ginagamit, yun yung problema ng social science. Masyadong gustong mag-came up ng science into a certain theory that is based on positivism, where in fact, that is really, really impossible. Okay? It's because if wanted to take a look at it, na it's somehow very different with social facts. So ngayon, we need to develop, okay, the analysis of the critical, okay, theory, or particularly the Frankfurt school, is that it wanted to take a look on the phenomenon, okay, of the ideology. Ang kine-question nila ideology, not just the economics. Ang kine-question na ideology, ano yung kine-question nila? For example, okay, ano yung mga ideology behind, okay, na lumulutang dito sa atin. Okay, for example, ano yung mga ideology na yan? Culture industry. Nadulot ng mass media. Okay? For example, yung pinost ko kahapon, actually yung post ko kahapon, kagabi, parang ang nakita ko nag-like si JM, yung bakit mahirap hanapin ang ang kahit saan na restaurant. Actually, yun ay, 'di ba? Nakita niyo na ba ang kahit saan na restaurant? Pag for example, pag sino yung nakipag-date sa inyo na sa inyo na saan tayo kakain? Kahit saan. Pero pag papasok na kayo doon sa restaurant, biglang all of a sudden ayaw pumasok.
Ayaw po doon.
Pero ang sabi kahit saan. Pero kung tutuusin, 'di ba? Ano yung mga dahilan ng kahit saan? Hindi lang naman 'yan ekonomiya. Merong psychology behind that. Merong social theory na pwedeng mabuo. Yun yung ano yan, meron kaming gagawin diyan isang webinar. Ang paghahanap sa restaurant na kahit saan. Anong dahilan? Kaya bang gawin niya ng positivist analysis, so sabihin natin true science. So ang kailangan natin dito tingnan yung depth ng psychology. Bakit ganito? Ay ang matindi pa diyan kahit ang pag nandoon na at o-order na kahit ano. Yan ang mahirap orderin, yung kahit ano. Ang biro ko nga, pag kahit ano, lalo pag mahirap i-pronounce. 'Di ba? Kahit ano na lang, So, yan yung mga tinitingnan ko. Actually, yan yung mga experiences ko kasi. Pero, paano mo gagawin yan? Gagawan mo lang yan ng isang critical theory din na analysis. Okay? For example, ano yung mga portrayal ng mass media? For example, sa femininity, sa pagkababae. 'Di ba? So, yun yung mga magandang tingnan. Okay? Pero, si Marcuse, he wanted to take a look at the critical theory of education. Yun yung gustong tingnan. Yun ang, si Marcuse, Henry Giroux pala. Henry Giroux. Okay, Donel, nakita mo na itsura ni Henry Giroux? Hindi yata sinerch ang mukha niya. Buhay pa yan, ha? Buhay pa yan. Isa yan sa mga rockstar ng philosophy of education and critical theory. Isa siya sa mga nakasama ko, may na-publish kami na paper, nakasama namin dun sa yung kanyang paper dun sa na-publish namin. Kaya sabi ko, it's an honor na siya yung nakasama namin. Kasama dun sa issue. Matindi yan. Matindi yung . So, he wanted to take a look at the certain, ang tinatawag nating critical theory of education. Okay? He wanted to take a look on that education itself, that schooling promotes oppression, dehumanization. Pero paano to nangyayari? Okay? So, yun yung gusto niyang tingnan. Okay? So, yun yung pinakaano niya. Okay, next tayo? Presenter? Sinong next?
Good evening, sir.
Yes, Ma'am Alma.
I will be presenting the chapter 2 of the book to give you the overview. It talks about the hidden curriculum and it discusses the 3 approaches. Let me just share the video.
Okay, while sineshare ni Ma'am Alma, gusto ditong tingnan kung paano nasa-subject. This is another, by the way, ito yung tinatawag nating the foundation of critical theory or critical pedagogy. Pero sa totoo lang, mas madaling intindihin ang critical pedagogy kay Freire kaysa dito. Masyado kasing ang dami kasi nitong sinasabi na ang hirap intindihin. Pero syempre, mga PhD student kasi kayo, kaya kailangan nyo na mas mabigat na theory. Okay, sige, Ma'am Alma.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alma Alambro, and for tonight, I am tasked to discuss to you the chapter 2 of the book entitled The Schooling and the Politics of the Hidden Curriculum. So let's start. There has been debates that have emerged in the last couple of years regarding the notion of the hidden curriculum. So let's start why this debates on the hidden curriculum is important. The first one is, it is important because it points the aspect of school life that links schools to the wider society. The second one, it points to the need to generate a new set of categories in which to analyze the function and mechanisms of schooling. According to Giroux, If the concept of the hidden curriculum serves as a valuable theoretical tool for radical educators, it will have to be resituated in a more critical discourse and become more attentive to the mode of critique and social theory developed by the Frankfurt School. And the character of this course of schooling has been considerably transformed. This is due to the following reasons: because of the financial cutbacks, the economic recession, and the shrinking job market. And because of that, progressive and radical critics of schooling have been reduced to a whisper. And because of that also, it is being replaced by the rhetoric of the cost efficiency experts. The changes in political issues translated into problems, which is that the imperatives of critique and negation give way to a mode of thinking. And in the 1960s and 1970s, educational reformers were at least able to speak with some impact. And that is, they argued that youth ought to be educated not for the present, but for a better future condition of the human race. And that is the idea of humanity. And also, the import business spokespersons, such as William Simon and David Packard, they urge major corporations to provide financial aid to universities and colleges, but not based on the academic reputation, but it is based on whether or they are sympathetic to free enterprise systems. And also, the increasing in their industrialization of schooling is obvious in the recent efforts of major corporations to establish endowed chairs of free enterprise in a number of major universities. The disregard that these efforts display for the conditions that safeguard academic freedom is matched only by the messianic fervor of their intent to spread the belief and values of the business community. The issues of withdrawal of resources from the schools and the redefinition of the curriculum, watered down pragmatic and instrumental terms, cannot be viewed as problems solely due to demographic shifts in the population and short-term recessional tendencies in the economy. They also make an excuse that the existing economic crisis to legitimate the conservative modes of pedagogy to potential critics. According to Giroux, that the viable approach for developing a theory of classroom practice must be based on the theoretical foundation that acknowledges the dialectical interplay of social interest, economic power, and political power. The earlier debates performed the credible task of undermining the mainstream assumptions about school curriculum. According to them, school curriculum was socially and politically neutral and reducible to the engineering of discrete behavior. They also added that the schools seen as an agencies of socializations. And because of that, they also reason out that education is meant more than providing students with instructional goals and objectives. They added that schools did more than teach students how to read, write, compute, and master content. This is according to Mihan 1980. School came to be seen as social sites with a dual curriculum. And what is this curriculum? The first one is the overt and the formal. The second is the hidden and the informal. And the nature of school pedagogy is in overt and formal, these are the stated purposes of school rationales, and also the teacher prepared objectives. In the hidden curriculum, on the other hand, these are the beliefs and values that are tacitly transmitted through social relations and routines that characterize day-to-day school experience. And the concerns with the hidden curriculum provided a starting point for the fundamental question of what schools actually do. It is viewed as a black boxes, according to Carabel and Hasley, 1977. And what is the black box? The black box paradigm ignores the concrete experience of both teachers and students in the favor of larger structural analysis concerned with social achievement and input and output of social distribution. This is also according to Mehan, 1979. The function of schooling. While there was and continues to be considerable agreement over the function of schooling, disagreement over the function of schooling, the hidden curriculum theorists generally agreed that schools process not only knowledge but people as well. Schools are considered to be a social sites that controlled meaning, and also it's a cultural site that contributed to the formation of personality needs. Another is it's not only social and cultural sites, but school mediate between society and the consciousness of individuals. Analysis regarding the purpose, nature, and the consequence of socialization are myriad and complex. And there are two ideologies that are need to be differentiated. The first one is the ideologies about schools and ideologies in schools. The first one, the ideologies about school, this is according to Wheaton 1981. These are the what schools are for and how they work, and of what it is possible for them to achieve. On the other hand, the ideologies in schools, these are the dispositions, structure, and modes of knowledge, pedagogic relationships, and informal culture that make up the daily character of the school itself. There are three important insights that, according to Guru, have emerged that are essential to a more comprehensive understanding of the schooling process. And the first one is schools cannot be analyzed as institutions removed from the socioeconomic context in which they're situated. Number two, schools are political sites involved in the construction and control of discourse, meaning, and subjectivities. And the last one is the common sense values and beliefs that guide and structure classroom practice are not a priori knowledge, universals, but social constructions based on specific normative and political assumptions. Let's look at the perspective on the hidden curriculum. It is defined as the unstated norms, values, and beliefs embedded in and transmitted to students through the underlying rules that structure the routines and social relationship in life. Another meaning is it is a non-academic but educationally significant consequences of schooling that occur systematically but are not made explicit at any level of the public rationales of education. This is according to Elizabeth Ballas, 1973. The divergent analysis on hidden curriculum are deep-seated philosophical and ideological perspectives that clash over the very meaning and nature of social reality. According to Giroux, that before the concept of hidden curriculum can be used as a theoretical tool for developing a critical pedagogy, it is important to understand the critique that the ideological assumptions embedded in the perspective of the study. Giroux distinguished three basic approaches that characterize that characterize in dealing with a hidden curriculum. The first one is the traditional approach, liberal approach, and the radical approach. According to him, each of these approaches contains rather broad theoretical boundaries. Their respective distinctiveness rests with what might be called their problematic. And how do we define problematic? According to him, the problematic of any theoretical approach refers to the first one, questions that govern its mode of social inquiry, and the second one, these are the questions not asked and the relationship between them. Guru also added that all of the approaches to be analyzed fail to provide the theoretical elements essential for a comprehensive critical pedagogy. So let's start with the traditional approach. The traditional approach starts with the question, what makes the existing society possible? In traditional approach, the key assumption that governs its problematic is that education plays a fundamental role in maintaining the existing society. The traditional perspective also, they are the proponent of functionalist perspective, and these proponents are Parsons, Driven, Jackson. According to them, schools are viewed as vehicles through which students learn the social norms, values, and skills they require to function and contribute to the existing society. In traditional approach, the hidden curriculum is explored through social norms and moral beliefs tacitly transmitted through socialization process that structure classroom social relationship. Also, it accepts uncritically the existing relationship between schools and the larger society. The transmission and reproduction of dominant values and beliefs via the hidden curriculum is both acknowledged and accepted as a positive function of the schooling process. And lastly, while the content of what transmitted through certain classroom practices is analyzed, the political and academic interests, such as beliefs and values legitimized, are taken for granted. Traditionalists also provide a theoretical service in illuminating how certain necessary societal values get tacitly transmitted via the hidden curriculum. They do not question the underlying logic that gives shape to institutionalized relationship among power, knowledge, and classroom control. So that's it. So let's go for the liberal approach. The liberal perspective rejects most top to bottom models of pedagogy, and students are viewed simply as passive role bearers and recipients of knowledge, and knowledge as something to be learned rather than critically engaged. At the core of the liberal problematic is the question of how meaning gets produced in the classroom. By considering knowledge a social construction, liberal critics have focused their research on the variety of ways by which knowledge gets arbitrarily mediated and negotiated within classroom settings. There is also the empirical research that have emerged. The first one is the actual and hidden content of schooling. The second, the principles that govern the form and content of schooling. And the last one, the importance of seeing educational knowledge as common sense categories and typification selected from the larger culture and society that teachers, students, and researchers use to give meanings to their actions. To sum up, the liberal approach, the most sustained focus that this type of liberal critic has been exhibited is in the area of gender study. Who reproduced a gender code that either worked against the success of women in certain academic areas, or limited their economic opportunities in the wider society. And the hidden curriculum in this perspective was to be found in specific practices like cultural images, forms of discourse that reinforce gender discrimination. And also in liberal approach, the study of curriculum focuses on how the system of schooling serves to reproduce stability and cohesion in the wider society. The study of social structures is put aside for analysis of how people produce and negotiate classroom meanings. Traditional emphasis on consensus is replaced by a radical focus on conflict. Liberal concern is with the way teachers and students create meanings is replaced by a focus on social structures and construction of meaning. The last one is the radical approach. The radical perspective on the hidden curriculum provide valuable insights into the schooling process. First one, It explained the political function of schooling in terms of the important concepts on denomination. Second one, it points to the existence of the structural factors outside the immediate environment of the classroom as important forces in influencing both the day-to-day experiences and the outcomes of the schooling process. Also, in the radical perspectives, both the theoretical and empirical work that dominate the approach, the focus is on the political economy of schooling. The central thesis is that the social relations that characterize the production process represent the determining force in shaping the school environment. In radical perspective, the school became factories for the working class, and it was alleged performed an insidious but efficient job of reproducing the existing class structure and labor force. To sum up, only little understanding of construction and social spaces that promote oppositional tendencies and behavior in schools. There is also a one-dimensional view of socialization. This is the observation of Guru. And students and teachers do not simply comply with the oppressive features of schooling as radical critics suggest. In some cases, both teachers and students, they resist, and they even modify school practices. Radical perspective fails to acknowledge or develop an adequate view of either consciousness, resistance, or culture. Also, this perspective has consistently ignored the existence of forms of dominance other than those of class oppression. Now let's look at the hidden curriculum, a redefinition. So this is a suggestion by Giroux that it needs to be redefined. First, the hidden curriculum must be redefined and resituated as a pedagogical concern. It must occupy a central in the development of curriculum theory. Curriculum theory and practice must integrate into its problematic a notion of critic that is capable of questioning normative assumptions underlying its logic and discourse. It must be used to analyze not only the social relations of the classroom and school, but also the structural silences and ideological messages that shape the form and content of knowledge. It must be seen as something more than interpretative tool buttressed with good intentions. The implication for classroom practice. There's an outline theoretical model. One of the major shortcomings of the existing literature on schooling and the hidden curriculum is that it has failed to develop a dialectical conceptual framework for grasping education as a societal process. Schooling must be analyzed as a societal process, one in which different social groups both accept and reject the complex mediations of culture, knowledge, and power that give form and meaning to the process of schooling. Power must be seen as a force that works both on people and them. Power is not a static phenomenon. It is a process that is always in play. It must be viewed within a theory of totality, meaning school as both an institution and a set of social practices that must be seen in its integral connections with the realities of other socioeconomic and political institutions. And teachers should critically consider questions of where such a culture comes from, whose culture is being implemented, whose interests it serves, and how it gets inscribed and sustained in school discourse and social practices. It is essential that teachers take seriously not only the beliefs and routines of the school, but also the underlying meanings and experiences that characterize students from different socioeconomic groups and which exist in various degrees of compatibility and resistance to the dominant school culture. According to Giroux, a theory of dialectical critique begins with a rejection of the official representation of reality. Negativity refers to a thorough questioning of all universals and integration of those received truths and social practices that go unquestioned in schools because they are dressed in the discourse of objectivity and neutrality. And there is a slogan, "Don't think, simply follow the rules." According to Giroux, teachers should not accept this kind of reasoning. In his conclusion, he said that hidden curriculum as it currently exists in the literature fails to provide the theoretical elements necessary to develop a critical pedagogy based on a concern with cultural struggles in the schools. What is needed to move beyond this position is a view of the hidden curriculum that encompasses all the ideological instances of the schooling process that silently structure and reproduce homogenic assumptions and practices. Lastly, he said that while such an approach in and of itself will not change the larger society, it will provide the foundation for using the schools as important sites to wage hegemonic practices. So that's the end of my report for the chapter 2. Thank you very much. That's the end of my report po.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am Alma. Your report is also very commendable. Uh,
Thank you
anyway,
po.
okay, so this one give us an idea. Kasi that time, siguro bago yung report, when you studied hidden curriculum seems to be hidden, right? Ito yung mahirap na hanapin, But now it gives us an idea, okay, particularly a new perspective into the possibility of hidden curriculum or its important role towards for example, pedagogical practice. So kasi okay, this is something that I realized that in every school, there is particularly what we called, okay, hidden curriculum. Ang naging problema lang nung kay Henry Giraud, it's that he was not able to provide, okay, kung paano nangyayari on how, okay, this phenomenon of hidden curriculum really, okay, emerge in a certain, for example, school. Kasi ang daming factors dyan na nag-i-emerge. For example, De La Salle, Sobel has a different hidden curriculum from for example, Xavier schools. Parang nawala ako yata. Okay? Or for example, okay, another is that if we're going to take a look at schools, halimbawa, mga iba't ibang yung mga schools nyo, dito mo mapapansin bakit yung school, yung estudyante dito sa isang school na to, parang iba doon sa pag nandoon sa ibang school. Iba yung kanilang kilos, iba yung gawi, etc. For example, ito na lang. Dati-dati, when I was studying Giro, particularly on this one, hidden curriculum, 2 years ago, hindi ko talaga makita. I can see it theoretically, but the problem is I really cannot identify what is the hidden curriculum of the different schools and these different universities. Hindi ko talaga makita. Pero dumating yung point na nalaman ko yung mga hidden curriculum ng mga different schools, particularly because it was the students who identified it. Okay, for example, hindi ko alam kung naging familiar kayo with the trash talk, Big Four, trash talkan. So, 'di ba yung nagkaroon tayo ng pangalan nito, nung March, when we were being quarantined, then all of a sudden, biglang nagkaroon tayo ng tinatawag na parang ang mga estudyante naging busy at nagkaroon ng group. So, nagkaroon sila ng Facebook group kung saan, okay, nagkakaroon ng kutyaan bawat mga schools. So, doon lumabas yung hidden curriculum ng isang school. So these are particularly, okay, sabi nga kanina, there are schools, ideologies for school and ideologies in school. So once these social economic groups nagsama-sama sila, merong nabubuo na isang tinatawag na hidden curriculum. Merong nabubuong mga practices. At batay dun sa nabubuong mga practices na to, ano na yung nangyayari. Okay? So, yun yung isang konteksto. For example, sa PNU, merong isang practices na nabubuo. Okay? Yun yung isang konteksto na tinitingnan, okay, ng konteksto ng hidden curriculum. But the good thing about Giro is that he was able to provide, okay, 3 perspectives and 3 approaches. Okay, the first one is the traditional approach, and then the second one is the liberal approach, and then the third one is the radical approach. Ang problema lang dito sa atin sa Pilipinas, hindi ko alam nasaan na tayo. This book was written in the early 80s, pero yung view pa rin natin sa sa schooling is what? Is it traditional, liberal, or radical? Anyone? Pagpaumanin nyo ha, kasi medyo parang hindi ako komportable ngayong mag-discuss kasi parang hindi ko alam kung nawawala ako or what. So, according to Jed, it's traditional to liberal. Okay? And what's the reason? Why, Jed? According to Sir Ed, it's traditional. Sige, Sir Ed.
Doc,
Jed.
ano po?
Yes, sir.
Doc, ano po, actually, ako kasi galing ako sa school, sa province, no? So, tapos, laki din sa Matanda and tapos nagka-chance na mag-aral ako sa Manila. No? So, to certain extent, nakita ko, sir, or na-expose din ako, for instance, sir, sa training sa UP, paano yung view ng mga tao sa UP. So, medyo, I'm not sure kung radical, no? Pero towards liberal, ano siya. So, nakikita naman, sir, sa practices na meron naman tayong towards na pagiging liberal. Pero undeniably, marami pa rin sa mga institution ay nandun pa rin tayo dun sa traditional belief ng reason ba't nag-school may mga schools tayo or ba't nag-exist yung mga schools.
Okay. Pero lumalabas ngayon, kung titingnan natin from mga different schools, for example, UP can be considered as wherein it promotes a radical schooling. Kasi 'di ba parang sinasabi pag sinabing UP, it's a ground for example, mga maraming nagwo-worry diyan na magpapasok ng anak, it's because magiging aktivista or sooner or later maging member ng underground. Okay? So yun yung isang sinasabi. Pero natutuwa ako dun sa sinabi ni Mention naman eh. Ang tinitingnan kasi, 'di ba, there's particularly a threat, na UP is promoting radical education. It's because, okay, ang nangyayari, UP has been the frontiers of student activism against the government, Pero ang sinabi ni Mention nung chancellor is that the government had forgotten that UP is also doon nangyayari yung formations of scientists, okay? What else? Engineers, okay? Or particularly yung mga other silent nation builders. So, nakikita natin na gano'n, Pero there are other, naman na traditional, okay? For example, okay, yung traditional schooling is that it reflects a certain kind of view na usually typical, ito yung mga typical na mga views ng ating mga magulang. Na kaya ka pumapasok, ay para matuto. At yung mga itinuturo lang sa school, yun lang ang dapat mong matutunan. So, pero sooner or later, meron ding mga ngayon na mga schools na pumupunta na ngayon into liberal. Okay, nakikita ko yung transitions and dialectics of nagbabago yung transition din ng schooling. Okay, it's because for example yung emergence ng gender and development. Okay, so medyo nagiging liberal na rin. So tama, it's from the traditional to liberal, and then sooner or later hopefully we will be able to come up with this radical schooling. Pero ito ay chapter 2 pa lang, So mamaya mas matitindi pa yung ibibigay na context dito. Okay? Sige, sinong kasunod na reporter natin?
Opo, Doc.
Sige, friend.
Friend pa. Yes po. Okay po, so let me just give you the overview po of chapter 3. So in this chapter po, series of educational theories were discussed, starting from the traditional educational theory, the theories of reproduction, which gave rise to two other theories, such as the theories of social reproduction and theories of cultural reproduction. And lastly is the theories of resistance. So this chapter also discusses how each of these theories viewed education in their respective periods of time. This also tackles the different points of view of some known philosophers about the mentioned theories, how their opinions may be compared to one another, and the strengths and weaknesses of their opinions. So let me just share my screen po.
Ma'am, wala po yatang sound.
Again po, ma'am. Wala po ba?
Opo. Paano po, ma'am? Sa taas, merong share computer sound.
Ay, sorry po.
Nasa taas po yan, ma'am.
Saan po banta? Sorry po, first time ko kasing
Yung-
gumamit ng Zoom.
Sa top right, may parang 3 dots dyan. And then, pag i-click nyo po. Hindi po dyan, ma'am.
Ay, sorry po.
Yung yung may
Ito
yung
po.
share computer sound po.
Ay, nako. Nakikita niyo po ba? Sorry po. Sir Jed, kindly po. Okay lang po ba?
Sige po, i-try ko po, ma'am.
Sensya na po.
Moment po.
Stop screen sharing po. Ito po ba yun?
Yan po, nakikita po.
Ay.
Nakikita po.
Good evening, Dr. Abenes and dear classmates. I'm here to present to you the continuation of the book, Theory of Resistance in Education, a
Yes,
Pedagogy for the Opposition by Henry H. Giroux. We will talk about Chapter 3, Reproduction, Resistance and Accommodation in the Schooling Process. I am Frenia Flor M. Pagdang.
Narinig po?
Yes, sir.
Yes po, pero wala po sir yung video mismo, yung PowerPoint po.
Ano ba yan?
Share screen lang po tama.
Opo, sir.
Okay, I got it po. Yan po.
A PhD. Good evening,
Yan
Dr.
po.
Abenes and dear classmates. I'm here to present to you the continuation of
Okay
the
na, Sir
book,
Jed.
Theory and Resistance in Education, a Pedagogy for the Opposition by Henry H. Giroux. We will talk about Chapter 3, Reproduction, Resistance and Accommodation in the Schooling Process. I am Frenia Flor M. Pagdanganan, a PhD Science Education student. But before we proceed to the actual discussion of Chapter 3, let us have an overview of the 2 chapters first. Henry H. Giroux discussed about foundation for a radical theory of schooling, which can in part be developed from the work of the Frankfurt School and the more recent literature on the hidden curriculum. Frankfurt School provides a discourse and mode of critique for deepening our understanding of the nature and function of schooling. Critics of the hidden curriculum have provided modes of analysis that uncover the ideologies and interests embedded in the message systems, codes, and routines that characterize daily classroom life. As indicated in Chapter 2, the specificities of culture, ideology, and power have never figured prominently in the dominant language of educational theory and practice. The Parsonian view of schooling, on the other hand, argues for a view of schools as neutral institutions that were designed to provide students with the knowledge and skills they will need to perform successfully in the wider society. This was established by Talcott Parson, an American sociologist of the classical tradition. He laid the basis for a sociology of education that refused to interrogate the relationship between schools and the industrial order. One consequence of this view, though, was that the structure and ideology of the dominant society was rendered unproblematic. Similarly, a disquieting silence emerged regarding how schools might be influenced, bent, and molded by interest groups that both sustained and benefited from the deep-seated political, economic, racial, and gender inequalities that characterize American society. Let us now talk about the first theory in this chapter, which is the traditional educational theory. The traditional educational theory is also known as back to basics, conventional education, or customary education, which refers to long established customs that society traditionally used in schools. In this theory, schools are viewed within the perspective as instructional sites, that schools as also cultural sites is ignored. This theory also refers to long-established customs that society used in schools, which offered no real basis for understanding the relationship among issues such as ideology, knowledge, and power. There are a number of practices in the traditional educational theory. First, ideology is dissolved within the concept of objective knowledge. Second, the relationship between the hidden curriculum and social control are discarded for a preoccupation with designing objectives. And finally, the relationship between socialization and the reproduction of class, gender, and racial inequalities are ignored for an overriding concern with finding ways to teach knowledge that is largely predefined. Now, how about the consequences of traditional educational theory? It offered no real basis for understanding the relationship among issues, such as ideology, knowledge, and power. That is, bleached from this perspective was any attempt to reflect on the historical development, selection, use, and legitimation of what schools defined as real knowledge. The crucial question ignored here is the way in which the power distributed in a society functions in the interest of specific ideologies and forms of knowledge to sustain the economic and political concerns of particular groups and classes. The failure to develop this type of analysis is evident in traditional educational theories, long-standing emphasis on the management and administration of knowledge, as opposed to a critical concern with the historical and social determinants that govern the selection of such knowledge forms and attendant practices. The next theory is the theory of reproduction, which rejects the assumption that schools are democratic institutions that promote cultural excellence, objective modes of instruction, and value-free knowledge. Instead, reproduction theories focus on how power is used to mediate between schools and the interests of capital. The theory of reproduction takes as their central concern the issue of how schools function in the interests of the dominant society. So what are the points of view of the reproduction theory? Number one, it shares fundamentally different perceptions of how power and control function in the interest of the dominant society, both in and out of schools. And it also played a significant role in exposing the ideological assumptions and processes behind the rhetoric of neutrality and social mobility characteristic of conservative as liberal views of schooling. Yet, while such approaches represent an important theoretical break from idealist and functionalist paradigms in educational theory, they still remain situated within a problematic that ultimately supports rather than challenges the logic of the existing order. There are also some serious consequences in existing theories of reproduction, the most important of which is the refusal to posit a form of critique that demonstrates the theoretical and practical importance of counter-hegemonic struggles. Another is that It is trapped in a reductive logic that appears at odds within the aim or even the possibility of developing a radical theory of education. In other words, neither the promise of oppositional teaching nor the more encompassing task of radical social change represents an important moment in these perspectives. But despite the weaknesses mentioned about the theories of reproduction, there are two positions that emerged from the reproductive approaches. These are the theories of social reproduction, which take as representative examples the seminal work of Althusser in 1969 and 1971, and Bowles and Gentes in 1976 and 1980. The other theory is the theory of cultural reproduction, with a primary focus on the work of Pierre Bourdieu in 1977A and 1977B, and the work of Basil Bernstein in 1977 and 1981. Let us talk about first the social reproduction theory. The theories of social reproduction takes as a central issue the notion that schools occupy a major, if not critical role in the reproduction of the social formations needed to sustain capitalist relations of production. Put simply, schools have emerged historically as sites that have integrated the traditionally separate task of reproducing work skills and producing attitudes that legitimize the social relations in which these schools are located. Several philosophers gave their points of views about the theories of social reproduction. One of them was Louis Althusser, one of the most influential Marxist philosophers of the 20th century. Althusser argued that the relation of the economic base to the institutions of civil society cannot be reduced to a cause and effect determination. Instead, he claimed that the legitimizing principles of capitalist industrialized societies are noted in the self-regulating practices of the state. Another is that there is a displacement of the logic of determination and domination from its primary contradiction in the economic sphere to other levels of society, such as the political sphere. That are necessary are instituted that as part of a static and administrative fantasy. Althusser's work is contrast to the work of Bowles and Gentes, who do at some point uh, focus on the specific mechanisms of schooling that serve the logic of capital. But first, let us get to know who were Bowles and Gentes. Samuel Bowles and Herbert Gentes are both American economists who stated that there are close parallels between schooling and work in capitalist societies. Schooling takes place in the long work of shadow, and these are what they called as the correspondence principle. Let us now compare, or let us now have the contributions of Bowles and Gintis. Their earlier work improved our knowledge of how the mechanisms of the hidden curriculum work through the social relations of the classroom. Bowles argued that the schooling process is inherently educational and complements These authors have argued for the importance of contradiction with that of Bowles and Gintis. Both sides share the basic notion in
Sir Jed, nawala po yata ang sound, sir.
And in spite of Balthasar's insistence on the role of ideology as a mechanism of domination, the concept ultimately functions to mystify rather than explain how people resist, escape, or change the crushing weight of the existing social order. There is also a failure to consider that domination is never fatal or that power itself is something other than a negative force reducible to the economic sphere or state apparatus. Lost from the social reproductive perspective is any serious consideration of schools as social sites that produce and reproduce ideologies and cultural forms that stand in opposition to dominant values and practices. The next theory is the theories of cultural reproduction, which began precisely at the point where social reproduction theories end. That is, the work of Althusser and Bolson-Gintes is characterized by a single failure to develop a theory of consciousness and culture, whereas the theories of cultural reproduction have made a sustained effort to develop a sociology of curriculum that links culture, class, and domination with the logic and imperatives of schooling. In other words, theories of cultural reproduction are concerned with the question of how capitalist societies are able to repeat and reproduce themselves. The work of Pierre Bourdieu in France and the work of Basil Bernstein in England represent two instrumental perspectives for studying the cultural reproduction position. Pierre Bourdieu was a French sociologist, anthropologist, philosopher, and public intellectual. What were his ideas about the theory of cultural reproduction? First, he made a sustained effort to develop a sociology of curriculum that links culture, class, and domination on the one hand, and schooling, knowledge, and biography on the other. Reproductive accounts that view the school as simply a mirror of society and argued that schools are indirectly influenced by more powerful economic and political institutions. And he also assumed that class divided societies and that speaks to the way human beings dominant ideologies. Bourdieu excludes both the active nature of domination as well as the active nature of resistance. It also offers no theoretical insights into either the nature of such resistance or what its value might be in pedagogical terms, what opportunities it provides for seeing beyond its phenomenal forms, and unraveling the possibilities that might be gleaned from understanding its strengths and weaknesses for critical thought. There is also a serious failure in Bourdieu's work regarding his unwillingness to link the notion of domination with the materiality of economic forces. There is no sense in Bourdieu's work of how the economic system, with its asymmetrical relations of power, produces concrete constraints on working class students. It appears to have forgotten that domination has to be grounded in something other than ideology, that it also has material conditions. Another insights about the cultural production was Basil Bernard Bernstein, who was a British sociologist known for his work in the sociology of education. According to him, the theory of cultural reproduction is how a society selects, classifies, distributes, transmits, and evaluates the educational knowledge it considers to be public, reflects both the distribution of power and the power of principles of social control. From this point of view, differences within and change in the organization, transmission, and evaluation of educational knowledge should be a major area of sociological interest. Arguing that education is a major force in the structuring of experience, Bernstein attempts to illuminate how curriculum, pedagogy, and evaluation constitute message systems whose underlying structural principles represent modes of social control rooted in the wider society. Bernstein's work is particularly useful in identifying how the principles of social control are coded in the structuring devices that shape the messages embedded in schools and other social institutions. In the final analysis, Bernard's work does not go far enough as theory or radical pedagogy. In conclusion, both Bourdieu and Bernstein surrendered to a version of domination in which the cycle of reproduction appears unbreakable. Though both theories provide illuminating analysis of the relative autonomy of schools and the political nature of culture as a reproductive source or force, Bourdieu and Bernstein end up either ignoring or playing down the notions of resistance and counter-hegemonic struggle. As a result, their insights are limited and incomplete. Going beyond theories of social and cultural reproduction, a number of educational studies have emerged that attempt to move beyond the important but limited theoretical advances that characterize social and cultural reproduction theories. Neo-Marxist accounts have not sacrificed theoretical depth for methodological refinement. That is, more recent Marxist studies have not followed the generally bland method of merely providing exhaustive descriptive analysis of the internal workings of the school. Neo-Marxism is a 20th century term that most loosely may be applied to a variety of scholars whose work has been influenced by classical Marxists. They share common point of departure and subject matter in Marx's social theory and the social order of 20th century capitalism. They are also concerned more with culture and ideology rather than economics. And the last theory discussed in this chapter is the theory of resistance. This provides a study of the way in which class and culture combine to offer outlines for cultural politics. Central to such politics is a semiotic reading of the style, rituals, language, and systems of meaning that constitute the cultural field of the oppressed. It performs a theoretical service in their call for forms of analytical analysis, political analysis that study and transform the radical themes and social practices that make up the class-based cultural fields and details of everyday life. It provides study of the way in which class and culture combine to offer outlines for cultural politics. Central to such politics is semiotic reading of the style, rituals, language, and systems of meaning that constitute the cultural field of the oppressed. Lastly, it deepens our understanding of the notion of relative autonomy, a greatly needed corrective in light of the long history of orthodox Marxist readings of the base structure issue, in which institutions like schools were reduced to the reflex or shadow of the mode of production. This chapter was concluded by pointing to the weaknesses in theories of resistance, and that the criticisms presented here represent starting points for further development of a critical culture theory of schooling. First, those studies of resistance point to the social sites and spaces in which the dominant culture is encountered and challenged by subordinate groups. Such studies have not adequately conceptualized the genesis of the conditions that promote and reinforce contradictory modes of resistance and struggle. The second weakness in theories of resistance is that the inadequate number of attempts to take into account the issues of gender and race. As Arnott, McRobbie, Walker-Dine, and others have pointed out, resistance studies generally ignore women and gender issues to focus instead primarily on males and class when analyzing domination, struggle, and schooling. Third, neo-Marxist studies of schooling seem to have an unfunny attachment to a definition of resistance, celebrating it as a mode of a political style. As a result, there are very few attempts within the literature on schooling and countercultural movements to situate the notion of resistance within specifically political movements that display resistance in the arts and or in concrete political action. Fourth, theories of resistance have under-theorized the point that schools not only repress subjectivities, but are also actively involved in their production. Fifth, theories of resistance Theories of resistance have not given enough attention to the issue of how domination reaches into the structure of the personality itself. That is, there is little concern with the often contradictory relation between understanding and action, and why one does not always lead to the other. And
Hello? Okay na? Are you still there? Are you still there? Okay pa ba?
yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Pagpasensya na kasi ang aking internet ngayon ay on and off kanina pang umaga. So I'm currently using my data ngayon, ano. So kaya medyo nahihirapan ako sa aking internet connection. So ang kasunod nating reporter ay sino ang kasunod? Sir Jed? Yata? Tama ba?
And good evening, my dear classmates. The second section of the book is about resistance and critical pedagogy. For my part, I'll be sharing with you some ideas of the author about ideology, culture, and schooling. These ideas serve as foundation to the development of critical theory of education, which is a major part of the next report. So I'll share my screen. Sige, nakikita na po yung screen.
Yes po, sir.
Okay po, sige po.
Good evening, Doc, and my dear classmates. Let's now proceed to the second section of the book, which is about resistance and critical pedagogy. For my part, I'll be sharing with you some ideas about ideology, culture, and schooling. These ideas serve as foundation to the development of critical theory of education, which is a major part of the next report. In the introductory part of the second section of the book, the author highlighted a quotation from Cornell. Portion of this quotation states, education has fundamental connection with the idea of emancipation, though it is constantly in danger of being captured for other interests. In a society disfigured by class exploitation, sexual and racial oppression, and in chronic danger of war and environmental destruction, the only education worth the name is one that forms people capable of taking part in their own liberation. With inspiration to this, the author emphasized that connection between schooling and emancipation exists. He pointed out that schools have a responsibility to equip students with the knowledge and skills they will need to develop a critical understanding of themselves and what it means to co-live in a democratic society. It was also mentioned, though, that education is both an activity and the region of social life that contribute to the legitimation and reproduction of a society steeped in domination and class, gender, and racial inequalities. With this, education becomes a risky enterprise, and teachers have to decide whose side they are on. And one bottom line presented here is that schools are more than just instructional sites. They are also cultural sites, arenas of contestation and struggle among differently empowered cultural and economic groups. Upon examining the chapter of the book assigned to me, I found some of the ideological views of the schools with their corresponding limitations as argued by the author. Let me present a brief summary of this. These were the inspiration of the author in pushing for a radical pedagogy. First, on positivist rationality. Within the legacy of positivist rationality, the notion of ideology was ignored, along with the assumption that schools were both ideological and instructional sites. This ideology wedded to the celebration of facts and management of visible. Positivist rationality excluded from its perspective those categories and questions that pointed to the terrain of ideology. This refused to interrogate the internal logic of the curriculum in order to reveal its hidden meanings, structured sciences, or intentional truths. Notions such as essence, false consciousness, and immanent critique were simply tucked away in favor of the discourse of administration, management, and efficiency. Ideological beliefs of schools also lies on traditional and orthodox Marxism. The focus here is on the relations of domination rather than the relations of struggle and resistance. And Marxism failed to explore how people acted against their own interests, shared in their own oppression, or what compelled them to stand up and resist oppression in the face of tolerable odds. This provides clues as to how subjectivities are constituted in schools. We also have this, what we call reproductive ideologies. This ideology illustrates how specific principles structure the text and classroom social relations so as to legitimate modes of learning that promotes passivity and rule following rather than critical engagement on the part of the teachers and students. This has failed to analyze how reproductive ideologies in texts and social practices are mediated. It is particularly important to acknowledge that texts are always mediated in some fashion by human subjects. Meanings are always produced by human agents when they confront and engage cultural forms such as curriculum texts, films, and the likes. And with all of this, the author said that there must be a radical pedagogy that addresses not only the cognitive aspects of learning and awareness, but needs and desires as well. Since oppression is rooted not only in socioeconomic structures, but also in the sedimented history or structures of needs that constitute each person's disposition and personality. And an effort for students to co-critically interrogate their inner histories and experiences. It is crucial for them to be able to understand how their own experiences are reinforced, contradicted, and suppressed as a result of the ideologies mediated in the material and intellectual practices that characterize daily classroom life. Now, the central theoretical task of radical pedagogy is to engage in ideology critique. Such critique investigates not only the way in which texts, behavior, and classroom practices legitimize and reproduce the dominant social order. It also looks at how meaning is produced and mediated by human subjects who interpret such texts, behavior, and practices through their historical, positional, family, and class background. And a radical pedagogy, which embraces the critical positive moment of ideology, encourages the formation of critical consciousness, engages in reconstruction, critical appropriation, and transformation. Thus, it aims at providing students with the knowledge and skills and critical sensibility they need to be able to think dialectically and to be able to interrogate their own histories, to penetrate the categories of common sense and move beyond their confines. And now on ideology and material practices, a part of the radical theory is a theory of ideology that is capable of comprehending the way in which meaning is constructed and material facts. And finally, a book that treated history as open-ended and subject to interpretation. What they actually found were history books that contained an anti-urban bias, book that promoted their content in commercial studio aesthetics, celebrated technology outside of the human relations, in which functions and collapse history into great moments, while simultaneously using a language that could suppress conflict. And they also found out that there is an increased use of pre-packaged curriculum materials that accentuate delivering instruction while at the same time removing conception and critique from the pedagogical act. With this, the author cited what Apple has argued. Apple argues that such curriculum material represents a new form of control over both teachers and students, one that indicates a process of reskilling and the emergence of more powerful forms of rationality that embody changing modes of control within the nature of capitalist relations of production. Each of these examples provides a mode of ideology critique that reveals how reproductive ideologies work. In all of these cases, texts relating to pedagogy suppress human agency while legitimating the management and control functions of the dominant classes. This leads the author's final point. This leads to the author's final point regarding relations among ideology, text, and social practices. The principle of reconstruction shifts the theoretical terrain from the issues of reproduction and mediation to a concern for critical appropriation and transformation. This suggests a mode of ideology critique in which the interests that underlie texts, representations, and social practices would not only be identified, but also disassembled and refashioned within the aim of developing social relations and modes of knowledge that serve radical needs. That would be the last part of the presentation, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sir Jed. Okay pa ba yung aking audio or nagpuputol-putol?
Yes,
Okay
sir.
po,
Okay
sir.
po.
Okay naman.
Okay po.
Kasi I'm currently using data right now, so kaya medyo talagang it has been the whole day na problema ko yung internet ko. So but anyway, okay, we discuss 4 chapters. Okay, primarily it discusses into number 1 is chapter 1 is about the attempt of Henry Guiraud into establishing critical theory of education. So right now, what we are doing is we're trying to take a look into the possibility of or the theoretical foundation of critical pedagogy. So in chapter 2, nagbigay ang ating reporter, particularly a discussions into discussions into the different views into education or approaches, the traditional, the liberal, and then we have the radical approach. And then what is a good thing about in chapter 3, mas binigyan yung mukha ng mga different descriptions and consequences, and trying to zero in particularly into the theories of, by the way, ang si Ma'am Friend ba yung reporter doon? The context is particularly
Yes po.
Althusser. Okay, ang basa doon, Althusser. So, and then we have Boyles and Bintis, and also na-discuss ko, nabigyan ko na kayo ng idea about Pierre Bourdieu. So, particularly by trying to understand capital. Okay, so yun yung binigay ko sa inyo during the first meeting. And then right now, okay, ang ginawa natin, okay, in the report of Sir Jed is trying to look into critical pedagogy, okay, in the classroom everyday life. So kung mapapansin mo yung chapter 1, 2, and 3, these are highly theoretical. Okay? Mga theoretical pa to, talagang medyo marami pa tong mga highfalutin words na it's really very difficult. It's because of certain familiarity, right? So pero mas mahirap tong basahin. 'Di ba Sir Donel, Ma'am, kaya humahanga ako kinda Ma'am Alma, kinda Ma'am Friend, and also in the Sir Jed. Mas mahirap tong basahin kaysa sa panoodin, ano? It's because the reporters have really done an amazing things into having this schema. Ang gaganda ng pagkakagawa nila ng schema ng discussions nito. And talagang medyo nag-guide tayo dun sa ating endeavor. But I will be honest that it will be quite hard, okay, for us to understand it now. Okay? But sooner or later, sa mga susunod na araw, mas makikita nyo. Kasi magkakaroon na to ng mukha. Okay? Kaya that's the reason why, okay, nung nakita ko yung nagkabaliktad, 'di ba, yung week 8 and week 7. So yung bakit pinagpalit ko yung week 8? Kasi yung week 8 is more into the theories of, okay, critical pedagogy. Pero ang argumento ko kasi is that here in the Philippines, we already have a critical pedagogy. So yung critical pedagogy natin, mayroon tayong dalawang philosopher na i-discuss that will be in week 8. Okay, so yung first one is Renato Constantino. I don't know whether you read Renato Constantino's Miseducation of the Filipinos. Sino nakabasa na nun? Meron nang nakabasa nun? Wala. Anyone in the group, in your undergrad, nabasa nyo ba to or hindi? So dapat kasi required reading yan sa undergrad, ano? So si Sir Ed ay merong libro, Revisiting the Past. Kasi ito ay part ng ating Sir Ed, part yan ng history classes. Pero yung Miseducation of the Filipinos, yan yung magkakaroon tayo ng bagong mukha. Mas madaling intindihin yung sinasabi ni Renato Constantino because it talks about our own, particularly experience, okay, colonial experience. Tapos dito ko maidi-discuss din kung ano yung naging participation ng PNU towards our own subjectivities. Tapos ang kasunod, we will be discussing, okay, this person, okay, Tuy Beo. So meron ding isang article ako na pinabasa sinend dun sa report, So yan yung magiging context nung magiging discussion natin. Kasi ang ginawa muna natin ng approaches ko, we go into foreignization of critical pedagogy. Pero ang problema, ito yung problema ng foreign theories. Kasi ang problema ng foreign theories, hindi natin makita yung mga set of examples. Kasi hindi natin ma-discuss sa ating sariling karanasan. Kaya nga, ang ginagawa natin ngayon, reading the word muna. Tapos, pag dumating na sa mga critical pedagogue natin, Filipino critical pedagogue, we already have their discussions on our own lived experiences. Kung paano, for example, ang hidden curriculum ay talagang na-subject tayo ng hidden curriculum, for example, ng American colonial period, at paano pa ngayon nag-uumpisa. So, Sir JM, ang nasend ko sa iyong article ay ilan? 3 pa lang Meron pa kaming
Yung po ngayon 3.
Meron pa ako isang isesend kasi 4 yata sila So, meron pa ako isang isesend yung article naman namin. So, pero how many reporters pa meron tayo? Natitira? May 3 pa yata eh.
Yes po.
After Sir Ed, sino pa? Si Ma'am...
Sir, ako pa.
Okay,
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5, tapos kasunod?
Po, sir, chapter 6.
Okay, tapos ang kasunod ay si Sir Ed. Okay, ganito muna ang gawin natin. Next week na lang muna ulit tayo. Parang tingin ko ay kailangan muna nating magpahinga. So next week ay ayan na yung presentation. Pero the Renato Constantino need to be ready para 4. Yung Renato Constantino kailangan mag-ready para at least ma-situate man lang. Kasi my plan is to compare Renato Constantino with these ideas of Henry Guiraud. So, yun yung gagawin natin next meeting. Okay, so any more questions, concerns?
Sir, excuse lang po. Sir, gagawa pa po ng Cornell notes?
Yes, gagawan nyo to ng Cornell notes. So, kasi talagang mahalaga to. Kasi ang problema ay hindi na nga kayo naimik ngayon. So, hindi tayo makapag-breakout rooms, hindi tayo makapag-discuss. Mahirap naman na hindi ko alam kung paano kayo gigradean. So, part naman siya ng nasa assessment ko na. Ahead of time, nasabi ko na naman, di ba, na meron. So, that's why syempre, pero yung reporter doon sa chapter na yun, hindi naman kailangan gumawa ng Cornell notes. So, yun, by tomorrow siguro ayusin ko, i-upload ko yung yung mga lahat ng mga na report kahit yung mga utang ko pa dati. Pero I'm already impressed with this 4. Medyo mahusay ang Pero may mga kailangan lang Sir Donel. Kasi pag i-broadcast kasi natin to ay medyo sayang na, perfect na yung mo, kaya lang may mga pronunciation lang. So ako, kung magagawa mo, maulit mo uli. Yun ay para pag in-upload natin yon, medyo na. Pag meron kayong mga unfamiliar names, you just consult Google para kung paano siya i-pronounce, para at least lalo na kung mga foreign names. So, any other concerns pa? Any other concerns pa ba?
Sir, question lang po.
Yes, man, friend.
Bali, yung isa-submit po namin Cornell notes for next week, yung 4 chapters po na na-discuss po ngayon. Tama po?
Kayo nang bahala doon. Kung gusto mong
Okay
mag-advance, i-upload ko na kasi lahat. Ano, yung kay Sir Ed pa lang ang hindi.
Okay po, sir.
Kung nag-advance, edi ano na yan. Kayo nang bahala. Ano?
Okay po. Thank you po, sir.
Teka lang ha, i-check ko lang muna uli kung ano pa, kung nasa na tayo. Ano, we have. Hindi naman tayo nahuhuli kasi ang dinesign ko yata ito ng, hindi ko matandaan kung dinesign ko tong, meron talaga tong break. So, check ko lang ha. Yan yung hidden curriculum kasi ng aking syllabus eh. So, kagaya nito, week 5 and 6. So, kaya hindi tayo affected ng break eh. Tapos yung, by the way, meron tayong, teka lang, i-check ko muna yung date ha. Titingnan natin kung okay tayo. Ang klase natin, ang tapos natin ng klase ay hanggang December 19. Di ba? Right?
Opo.
December 19. So, meron pa tayong ilang weeks. Sir JM, pag-guide nga tayo para at least makita ko sa calendar.
Parang may 4 pa po. Ay,
Okay,
saglit.
4 pang weeks. So, meron pa tayong isang, di ba nawalan ba tayo ng isang pasok ng ano? Nawalan tayo ng isang pasok ng bagyo?
Yes po.
So, magme-makeup.
Opo, November 13 po.
Merong makeup class ha, merong makeup. Baka yan is Sunday. Ano, so titingnan natin kung paano. Pero huwag kayong mag-alala kung yung makeup na yan ay makeup, asynchronous na lang. meron na kasi akong mga video na ginawa. So, i-ano na lang natin yan, asynchronous. So, kaya dalawa kasi yun eh, yung aking video na ready na. So, yun. What else? Any other concerns? O, kumusta na kayo? Na-enjoy nyo yung health break nyo?
Hindi po.
Hindi, sir. Kasi
Kasi bumagyo po.
May mga backlog. Sa school po, sa work.
sa work, wala.
Hindi naman talaga
Sir, walang pahinga.
ang problema lang sa school, huwag niyo kahapitin, hindi naman kasi nauubos ang trabaho. Kaya lang ang problema natin ngayon, may deadline kasi nag-aabot na tayo, matatapos na kasi yung fiscal year. So sunod-sunod talaga yung kaya ako ay nararamdaman ko na yung pagod, tapos may pabigat pa. Ikaw na nga yung naghihila ng paragos, tapos may sumasakay pa. Nakakapagmura eh. So, matagal mo nang na-deliver yung mga deliverables, tapos sila pa mismo yung hahanapan ka pa na ikaw yung dahilan kung bakit na-late yung submission, tapos ikaw pa ang sisisihin. So, medyo mabibigat eh. Tapos ang dami mo pang sa daan, nagkakarga ka pa. Diba? Kasi nga ay malapit na eh because of the fiscal year. Laging uunawain nyo na unlike with private schools na wala kayong hinahabol na fiscal year. Pero kami kasing mga nasa SUC, ramdam namin hanggang December 23 to kasi OPCR, IPCR pa, tapos pag may hawak ka pang opisina, may OPCR ka pa, tapos ang problema yung year-end report, tapos ang dami pang activity na gustong ipagawa, na gustong pahabol, plus preparation pa for term 2. Mabigat. Napakabigat ng nangyayari ngayon, kaya nararamdaman ko yung load. Hindi ako makapag-file ng paternity leave. Yan ang pinakamahirap. So kasi unang-una because of the cancellation of classes, so hindi ako makapag-file ng leave. I still don't know, pero hahabulin ko yun sa 60 days. So yun yung isa pa, medyo Pero if you have time, if you could rest, wala pa naman kayong gasinong mga hawak na mga offices. Ang problema kasi pag may hawak ang opisina, hindi ka pwedeng magpatulog-tulog. Tapos nandito pa ngayon ako sa bahay, mas maraming trabaho. Okay, what else? Kumusta na? Nakakangiti pa ba? Sino na nang ano dito? Meron ako, si Donel, matindi to eh. 12 units pa to eh. Ano, Donel? Matindi to eh, 12 units eh. Sino pa ba 12 units dito? Yung mga nag-9 units dito, sabi nyo, online ha?
Kala na, kasi sir, madali pag
Sir,
online.
kasi sabi hindi daw mabigat kasi online.
Yung pala sir, dami po pala na nakalagay sa ICLA, sa EPNU.
Hindi, kasi ganito yan. Ang equivalency kasi niyan ay, ang equivalency kasi ng dapat yung maunawaan na pagdating ng new normal, equivalent na yan sa students ng learning hours. So, iba kasi yung face-to-face sa learning hours. Tapos, ang equivalent niyan sa faculty, course design. Yun yung pinakamahirap. Kasi yung course design mo, dapat tapos na bago mo palang bago mo palang gawin. So, yun yung napakahirap. Hindi ko alam, teka lang, i-share ko lang sa inyo siguro yung my series of reflection para at least mas maunawaan nyo kung ano yung nangyayari sa atin. Meron kasi akong binubuo ngayon na theory, particularly based on my experience. Ito lang, I think tingnan nyo lang to. Ito yung aking mga series of pero hindi ko pa lang to at least maano pa ngayon. So this one, okay? So ngayon kasi nag-iba na yung learning ecosystem natin. Tapos we need to understand transactional distance. Tapos I'm currently exploring this four-prong approach. So, ano yung tong four-prong approach? Particularly the balance of content, instructor, cohort, and interface na talagang napakahirap. So, ito yung isang dapat nating i-consider. Okay? So, for example, okay, yung learning ecosystem dati, ito lang. Diba? Student, peers, library, textbook, instructor. Pero ngayon, nag-iba na. Ito na yung learning ecosystem natin. Ganito na. Pero sooner or later, babalik pa ba tayo sa old normal? Hindi na. Kasi sooner or later, meron na tayong digitized classroom, meron na tayong disintermediation, sooner or later, meron na tayong gamification, meron na tayong opening of information. So talagang, tapos sooner or later, we're going to have the tangible computing. And then, okay, kung mapapansin natin, nag-iba na rin. This is a good illustration na kung paano nag-iba yung old normal from the new normal. So we have the lectures, then we have now the synchronous, asynchronous. Kung dati-dati, discussion boards and Google Suites, and etc. Physical, laboratory, may mga simulation labs. Minecraft, yung mga nagtuturo na pet laboratories, mga nagtuturo ng science, virtual telescope, Celestia, and then Avogadro, ito sa mga science to. Exams, a better understanding of formative and summative assessment, and then reading activity, digital and traditional assessment ay medyo nag-iba na rin. And then, ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo, yung face-to-face discussion, naging learning hours na. So meaning to say, ang problema ngayon, for example, nagtataka ako bakit, for example, in basic ed, ang daming nagrereklamo sa modules. Marami daw yung ginagawa sa modules. Where in fact, kung tutuusin, kaunti lang, hindi naman ganun kadami yung babasahin. Sasagutan lang yung module eh. Ang problema kasi ng mga students natin, hindi sila mga readers, mga listeners kasi yung mga students natin. And then, this one is a good illustration. ito yung theories of transactional distance. So ngayon, dahil magkakalayo tayo, dapat merong structure, okay? And then, after that, ay merong dialogue. Ang problema, nawawala kasi yung dialogue. So kaya, ang nangyayari, okay, dapat ngayon, mas matindi yung levels of autonomy. Kaya lang sa akin, ang ginawa ko lang sa inyo ay magkita-kita lang tayo. So, yun yung isa kong kinonsider dyan. And then, andyan pa ba kayo? Are you still there? And then, ito na yung isa kong ginagawa. Ano? Kung dati-dati yung e-learning, nandito lang sa tabi. Ano? Nandito lang sa tabi. Tapos, yung e-learning is to keep up with the workforce skills up to date. Pero ngayon, nasa center na siya. Nasa center na yung e-learning. So, because of this e-learning, siya na yung nagbi-build na as instructor, hindi lang content ang meron ka. Hindi naman tapos ang matindi pa niyan, you need to build learning communities pa. Ay ang problema, pag mga walang connection yung mga estudyante natin, malaking problema. Another, may LMS pa ka pang problema, 'di ba? Pag unfamiliar ka sa LMS, so okay, so medyo nawala na ako. Okay, so yan. Another is interface is with respect to yung interface pa ng LMS na medyo mahirap kasi medyo unfamiliar pa kayo. So that is one consideration kaya medyo talagang napakabigat. Ano? Ito pa lang yung medyo ina-explore ko ngayon based on my own lived experiences. So kaya mahirap, mahirap. Pero isipin niyo na lang na hindi na tayo babalik sa old normal. Talagang ito na. Siguro unless kung sa DepEd babalik pa rin pero with the higher education hindi na tayo babalik. Okay, andyan pa ba kayo?
Yes,
Yes,
po.
po.
Yes, sir.
Yes po.
Kayo po nag-like.
Yes, sir.
Oo nga pa, wala-wala ako eh.
Lalag po kayo.
Kaya lalo akong na-stress.
Yes, sir.
Okay, pero anyway, ganito ha. With regards to the final requirement, ipapakita ko lang, titingnan ko kung maaayos ko next week yung pinaka-summary, yung aking outline. And then after that, okay, hahatiin ko na kayo sa grupo kung papaano. And then, nawala na naman ako. Okay. So, ito yung nakaka-stress eh. Ano? Pero anyway, sige, I'm just going to have the outline for next week and then ipe-present ko sa inyo. And then, I'm going to ask you to interview some individuals in those specific, for example, as part of your final requirement. Okay, so anyway, okay, so we need to go siguro. It's already 8:20. Yung nakakain na ba kayo ng hapunan? Hindi pa.
Ito po.
Sige, kain na muna. Pero wag muna kayong matulog kasi lalo kayong mga mananaba na kayo pag ano. So muna kayo dapat kumakain na muna kayo bago magklase. Si Ma'am Amor, nasan ngayon? Nasa school pa ba, Ma'am Amor?
Pauwi na po, sir.
Kumusta ang bata?
Okay naman po, sir. Ginawa po namin yung aming pagbabarangay na yung aming pong stakeholder. Sabi niya, diba? Stop?
Oo.
Sir Dominic, nasan ka na ngayon?
Sir, papunta kami ng North Carolina. Thanksgiving ngayon, sir. Dito sa amin. Kaya, yun, nasa biyahe ako, sir. Hindi ako nag-drive ngayon, sir. Pinadrive ako para lang makinig sa klase nyo. Pinadrive ko si misis ko.
Yun naman. Sana all.
Hindi pwede pa-drive yun, sir. Eh.
Ha?
Di mo pwede pa-drive si misis mo. Nanganak eh.
Hindi, kaya na. Kaya na. Kaya na mag-drive ng misis ko ngayon, kaya okay na. Medyo naka-recover na.
Apo.
Kaya lang, ako ang hindi pa nakaka-recover kasi puyat din ng pag-aalaga ng bata.
Congrats, sir!
Congrats, sir.
Ano ba? Sabi, mga nagsasabi cute daw eh, tsaka pupogi ng anak ko eh.
Totoo, sir. Totoo. Super.
Nasa jeans kasi yun. Nagkataon lang recessive sa akin, recessive. Sige, paalam na. Next week, yes, Sir JM.
Hintayin ko po yung isa, sir, na PDF po.
Oo, isang article ko yun. Ano ko na lang, isesend ko na lang. Sige. Maraming salamat.
Thank you po.
Thank you, classmate.
Thank you po.